redundant, as good as a university is, if that goes redundant, along with any other university of the caliber, I'm very afraid for future generations. That is more objective than subjective.
Why? What are you afraid of?
Because education is about shaping minds. It's about developing, it's not about gaining knowledge as much as it is for developing knowledge and developing wisdom. When I was a student at UWA, our motto used to be, I think it's changed as of late, but our motto used to be, seek wisdom. It still is. Oh, okay, glad, because I don't see it on the website anymore. I missed that on the website. Maybe you should put it back on online. I was missing it. But yeah.
It's carved on the wall. Private art building. That's what I walk through every day.
But it's not online now. Okay, sorry for the boo-boo, but yes, the motto was, and still is, thankfully, seek wisdom. Now, if you take universities, good universities out of existence, that's that much opportunity taken away from the entire human race for seeking wisdom towards not economic gain, not towards greater commerce, not towards greater capital, but towards our very survival. Remember, it's a rat race, yes. We are all striving for greater share value, greater salaries, greater profits. But at the end of the day, for what? Really? Intrinsically, at a subconscious level for ourselves? Or rather for the generations unborn that will come after us. We are designed intrinsically by nature, and we can go into another conversation on that on a separate occasion, but we are designed for self-preservation. And the primary tool for self-preservation is what? The motto of the University of Western Australia, seek wisdom, which is why I'm afraid of a university like that going out of existence.
Right.
I'm sorry, I love speaking too. So.
I think it probably is the stuff of fantasy to actually believe that despite the importance of AI, artificial intelligence, that it will render educators and educational institutes redundant. So, if there are no questions, are there? Well, there is, all right.
It's been said that the world we live in today is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and ambiguous. My own thoughts is that it's not only now that we live in a VUCA world. We've always lived in a VUCA world, except that VUCA is changing a lot faster today. The question I have for the panel is this. If you are a policymaker in the education field, how do you prepare the future generation to deal with a world where the only constant change? Because there's always a time gap. By the time the current students graduate, we are like what Harish is, a futurist with his crystal ball gazing, trying to predict what future needs is in a constantly changing world. So how do we, educators or policymakers, prepare institutions, curriculum development, or industry for demands to meet those kind of demands?
Thank you for the comment. I think there was another line in the magazine that I received from UWA for the alumni members. It says, "Pursue impossible." I thought that was really, really cool. What's it there? Wasn't planned, I promise. I think in response to that comment, I think a lack of foresight is the central failure of a leader, right? And so it's almost an ethical failure. The lack of foresight is an ethical failure of a leader. And so if you're a leader in education, you need, or the leader of the country, you need foresight to see, 50 years ahead, 100 years ahead, what could be things looking like. And I think, I was just reflecting on how Singapore has progressed, right? We talk about our first generation leaders, we call them pioneer leaders. So we had nothing, we built. So we've got bureaucracies, systems, buildings, okay? Together. One generation built these things. So we've got this gap now, right? From nothing, we've got this gap. And now with all these systems, the second generation needs to manage these systems, because if not, they all just fall apart, right? When we are managing these systems, it means that your curve looks like this. It's more or less like a straight line, a little bit up, a little bit down. As you mentioned, the environment is getting more and more complex by the day. So this curve is pretty steep. And at some point, they'll meet. And if they meet, and if the social complexities exceed these manager leaders' capabilities, then we're in trouble. So what I think is, for the third generation, I think the keyword is transformation. I think educators need to teach. I don't think transformation can be taught, but how do we excite the younger generation to ask good questions and pursue if possible, and give them the tools. And that comes back to research, where research, I think, has a huge role to play, and give them the tools to find answers that are as close to answering these questions as possible.
I think also in research, you do experience the ebbs and the flows of life, because you will always find in the course of research that you'll be coming up against, a stone wall. You can't seem to find the answers that you want, and you have to find something. And that's why I personally always have a problem when people say, make learning fun. Because life isn't fun. I'm sorry for something like pessimism. Life isn't fun. And if we are going to prepare our children to take on the world, to take on the volatility of the world, we have to put them through and not shield them from the fact that sometimes learning can be difficult. It is a struggle. It is difficult, but it's also triumphant when you do come out of it. So I think research is one of those ways that actually mirrors the way we go through life. There will be the ebbs and there will be the flows. Sorry, I'm crossing over to panel right now.
I just wanted to basically follow on from what you said. I think that's an excellent point. It's like we always say to our kids, make learning fun, but the hard things in life are the ones that you work for. Like maths is not easy no matter how you couch it, and maths is probably not fun. Learning languages, second or third languages, may not necessarily be the most fun thing in the world unless you really have a passion for it. So I guess I really had two questions. My name badge says Bachelor of Commerce 1989, so I was around before the internet. Sounds weird, but yeah. It's probably a few months.
I'm relieved that you're a little bit older than I am.
Can I say something before you ask a question? You really don't look half that age it sounds.
So really I have a two-part question. Is that there's no shortage of content in this world. We for example, you can fill your brain in Wikipedia. You can do nothing but try and read Wikipedia. If you look at, for example, the MOOCs, the online learning campaigns, I heard that at Stanford University has 100,000 enrollments for a computer science module they put online, but only 1,000 people finished the course. So I have really maybe a two-part question. The first one is on content creation, content curation, how we get the right content in front of our students. The second one is a pretty simple question, is that from an educator's point of view, is a student is he the customer or is he the product of your educational institution?
I would like to take your second question. I see that the student and us as educator, we co-create that learning outcome. So we are in that process together. So earlier I shared about teacher being a learning expert. So you design that flow and that methodology for whatever curriculum you want to cover. And I think there is absolute confidence in the student, they know where to find the content. So there's this overload of content. So that it will be for us to design it in a way to facilitate it in that process, where they are a key entity and we co-create it. And in that process, we impart skills, that discernment of what is right in the internet, how you test it out, and asking that big open question for them. So on that note of that huge content on the internet, these days we talk about learning as learning forward, leaning forward, and leaning backward. So leaning backward is they could be there, comfortable at their own time, and then with the phone and the iPad, and they're searching information, and that load of information. And at the same time, to get them to want to lean forward without us making it compulsory that they want to learn. And how you marry that, I think there's a huge opportunity. So So to give you an example, previously when I was with Singapore Airlines cabin crew training, we have our core training, they must attend. And then we schedule the crew down, and they come for the class. At the same time, we create an opportunity of they lean forward because they want to, and that self-directed learning. So they take their leave and they come. So let's say, for example, they are on a flight of SQ to London, and then they come back, they have 2 days off. It's their off day. And we were so amazed that they take their off day to come down and self-direct the learning. So if we could do that with our students, that leaning forward of the pull factor, and then that leaning backward because they have that time of all that information available, and how to marry that in that process, to co-create it with them, I think that would be a very wonderful outcome.
All right. So we have time for one last question, if there is one.
Actually, before the last question, to answer your first question, something came to my mind. There's this quote from the ex-CEO of HP. She said that the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. And I totally agree with that because you're right, Google gives you so much information. But how you take the important information and analyze it, interpret it, what does it tell you, and how you can apply the information, that's something that, in my opinion, students can't really do without guidance from teachers. So that's the thing that with teachers have like a plethora of information and experience that they've gone through that they know beforehand. So when they guide the student, like, oh, no, I didn't see it that way. Cool, thanks for that. So that's what students go up to teachers for. From my experience, when we respect a particular teacher, we like the way they think, we like the way they treat us, we like the way they behave, how they're passionate for their students. Then when you gain their respect, they respect you, and then they go to you fearlessly. They go to you thinking, okay, I can trust this person knows their work, I'm not afraid to ask a stupid question. Then they'll really be exactly working with you to create that goal, to achieve that goal of learning.
Sorry, I need to add to that. That is precisely why we cannot have the future without human teachers.
Hello everybody. Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you very much. I've been really, really enjoying the discussion and everyone's contribution. I really have 2 questions, but I think one thing I've learned is actually just to keep it simple, so I'll just ask one. It is, where do you see as the role of failure in learning? And how do we help people be comfortable with failure so that they can learn?
That's a tough one in the Singapore context.
That's a great point. I think with regard to your point too just now about how do I work with the students in the hostel and with the students that I supervise, I think it still comes down to design with intention. So if you're the teacher, you're the coach, and you're trying to guide a discovery, then through design, you could still create a safety net whereby the students are allowed to fail. And those become teachable moments, whereby those failures don't necessarily cause losses in life and so on and so forth. So I think those things can also be designed. But more importantly, I think it is about the creation of an environment whereby failure is okay. Because that then will encourage them to want to try, to want to ask questions, to want to innovate. But if we don't provide an environment where people feel safe to try and ask questions, then essentially they would be deterred to learn, or they will be impeded from their learning because they can't try. They're afraid to try.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that my kids went through, my daughter went through. She's 13, and she was talking about, I can't remember the specific context, but it was about her, about the teacher presenting them with a problem. And they were supposed to gather in their groups to find a solution to that problem. Long and short of it was that at the end of the day, after brainstorming and coming up with solutions, teachers essentially said, no, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, right? And she came up feeling so frustrated because she came home and she complained. She says, There was no answer to that question, and that was what's frustrating. And I think we're so used in our systems to have answers that there is always, an end to it, and we are uncomfortable, and kids today are uncomfortable. Kids today, we are uncomfortable with open-ended statements and I really applaud the teacher for coming up with an exercise like that, for the students to realize that sometimes you don't have an answer. Sometimes it is something that you perhaps would have to wait for along the way, and that's patience, and that's part of education as well.
Before that, you reminded me of one scenario. Earlier I told you about my nephew, right? Now I tell you my niece. She's in P5. So there's this composition in the school context that she needs to write, and the picture that was given to her to write an essay was this bird lying on the floor. And then there's this big tree. So she wrote a whole composition talking about, global warming. We've got to take care of the environment. If not, what will happen and so forth. And she has a D. So she was very upset. So when she came to my auntie, to my sister told her, why don't you go and check with the teacher? If you felt so strongly you deserve an A, and you felt so passionate about that point. And then she went forward, and the teacher said, no, what I'm expecting is, that story about, how you find this bird lying there, what you do with the bird, and so forth. But she said, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm more on the bigger picture about the global environment. So I think that could also be a time for us as educators to take a look at ourselves. Are we setting up people to look at the bigger picture, and then, or we are just telling them that you must go by A, B, or C?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier when reading story. That's precisely what I was talking about earlier, that we still live in a world today where we are teaching our young what to think rather than how to think. Coming back to your question on failure, we really have a lot more failure in the world today. I mean, as in failure being thrown around because of thinking like that, our own mindsets like that, okay, if it's not what I want to think, you're a failure. If we change our mindsets and we allow the culture, the global human culture to change, that, look, it's not what you say that matters, but how you come to arrive at what you're saying that matters, then there'll be a lot less failure, and there'll be a lot less fear of failure, and we'll be learning a lot more.
Failure, right? Failure is something that we are so afraid of, and we're afraid of it because of the pressure of succeeding. We keep thinking, okay, I have to get a high distinction, I have to do well, I have to hit, first class honors, then I'll get a good job, then I'll have enough money, then I can buy a house, then I can buy a car. So you have this pressure in your brain. You think, okay, I cannot afford to fail because of all these things that I'm expected to do. But when we take away that expectation, we take away that fear, then it will be more comfortable for them to accept failure. And I think that if we focus more on developing a positive growth mindset, that okay, you know what, my goal is to learn why is it this way. My goal is to expand my thinking. My goal is to, then the results come as a byproduct instead of being the goal is to get a high distinction. Because then when that comes as a result, learning would be fun. Learning would be something that you look forward to. You wouldn't be afraid to come to school. You wouldn't be freaking out over your exams. Exam results wouldn't be, oh my god, am I going to pass or fail? It would be, okay, I want to go and find out what I got wrong and how I can improve, how I can do better. Because that growth mindset would be, I'm always changing, I'm always getting better. It's not a test of how smart or stupid I am. It's a test of how I am so far and how I can do better. So you're more interested in knowing what I got wrong and why I got it wrong. Okay, so that kind of thing. So that might help with dealing with failure, taking the pressure off. Yeah.
Very good, very good. So what we have two last questions. I really don't want to deny that. So 2 last questions, and more importantly, we'll try to keep our responses short.
Okay, hi, I'm Melissa. I got out from UWA like 2012. I was a psychology graduate, but right now I'm teaching sports, just like Marcus. Well, I'm just making a commentary because I am working right now with one of the lowest socioeconomic classes of Singapore. My school is amongst the biggest here locally as well. okay? And it's a huge constant problem because you guys are talking about failure, okay? Our sense of failure is different because we're privileged enough to go overseas and study. That's the honest truth. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's be really, down to the ground kind of thing. Let's get real. Okay, these guys that I'm working with, they have learned that failure is part of their lives. They have it so deeply ingrained that I have struggled to actually try and break them out of it. We're talking about teaching them thinking. Okay, I just completed teachers training, and guess what's on the teachers training list right now? Oh, you must have an answer for every question that you design. It is a huge shock to me because, look, I am a psychology graduate and I'm like, yes, we should all teach Socratic thinking in schools. And then guess what? The ones who get it are alright, not the ones in my school. Which is really bizarre to me because these are the guys who really need it at the end. We're talking about people just learning to, simply decide to make a good decision. Wake up just half an hour earlier, show up for school half an hour earlier, you gain the extra knowledge from half an hour. But no, they show up an hour late, half the time. When the most important bits are over, they show up. I've got students who show up didn't show up for the last 2 sessions of rugby, and then they show up and they're like, I don't know the rules. I'm like, you didn't come. So what do you do about that? So I mean, it's a very real situation that we are facing here in Singapore. It's not us at the ground any longer, I think. It's also people at the ground raising that idea and concept upwards to the high ups. It's great that Singapore is doing so well in education up there, but that's the bottom of the pyramid thing. I think we really need to study how the bottom socioeconomic classes are surviving it without the tuition classes that we've been entitled to. It's a whole new ballgame at the bottom. So I think that maybe perhaps we can start thinking about microclimate at the bottom and helping these kids to get up, because you know what? The worst thing is they're spreading their foods all over. It's very seriously.
Good, thank you for that. That is a very interesting observation, and I think that's really what this whole session today is all about. I'm hoping it's more than just a talk shop, and that we can, especially those of you who are educators, it should spur some thoughts on what you can do to build deeper roots rather than build wider knowledge. One last question.
My name is Lindsay Potts. I graduated in 1994 in psychology. In 1998 I came to Singapore. I've been here ever since. So I think there's a number of points. I'm managing director of Lee Hecht Harrison, so we deal with workplace transformation with hundreds of individuals, companies going through restructuring. We also do a lot of executive coaching for Singaporeans. And so first thing, I think Singapore is a great place. There's no need to be too kanchong about things. I think it's got a great future.
No, it's actually Paiseh.
It fits a very strong niche in the market. I just think, again, it's augmentation. So like cognitive computing, all of these things, it's augmenting the ability of humans. I think in the education side, we all know the mindset, the software, and the mind that is constructed in Singapore is the domestication process drives us towards triangulating on the right answer. And the meaning behind having the wrong answer is a slap or a cane or what have you. So we see that in the workplace where people fear making a mistake because of the meaning that is associated with it. So that's part of the problem, not part of the problem, part of the issue. But the other side of it, the education process, I think we need to broaden our understanding. What we've been talking about is the nuts and bolts of education, so passing exams, acquiring knowledge. So I learned more off campus or on campus outside of down at the pub, essentially. The sports, for instance, has huge lessons around how to interact with people, deal with ambiguity, how to lead people in ambiguity. Also, university, speaking with your peers as well. Learning environments, communities where you can set up new businesses and so forth. So I think we need to broaden that mindset and also create the love of learning. I think in Singapore it doesn't necessarily come from the educators. I think they've changed. A lot of it comes from home. You know, there's a lot of this old-fashioned thinking about what education is, and I agree in terms of the future is now, but it's very patchy. We're seeing cognitive computing coming into organisations in a massive way. OCBC, DBS, 45%, 50% of people are going to be leaving in the next 3 to 4 years. Alibaba is seen as one of the biggest competitors to DBS. So the changes here, I think Singapore will cope with it because of the transformation, but I think education needs to be seen more broadly. It's not just about studying, it's not just about gaming the test and doing the best. It's about, back to Singapore in the old days, much more broad thinking, social networks, solving problems, dealing with complexity that Singapore was in the beginning. So, thank you.
Thank you for that observation as well. I think, yeah, that's really a good point that you've made. We're essentially talking about how, and I'm glad that the Faculty of Education has willingly opened this subject up to so many aspects of it. And here we are, not being educators ourselves, talking about the broader aspects, while people like yourselves, who are the educators, you are hemmed in by the need to still fulfill the academic objectives. So hopefully it's not a case of never the twain shall meet, but it will be a case where somewhere along the lines we're going to get better at, as I said earlier, not just building wider, but going deeper as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for being here, and would you please convey your thanks to the panelists. So I would like to right now invite the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Hannah Wilby, to give her closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, for your wonderful facilitation of the discussion tonight, which has been so smooth and sophisticated. I think your parents will be proud. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's a particular event for us, and one which we haven't yet mentioned, and that is that this event is part of the Faculty of Education's centenary celebration. We're celebrating 100 years of education at UWA. And so I'm grateful to the office at our campus for taking this opportunity for us to join with our graduates here to celebrate with you our history. I think it's been a very interesting discussion that we've had tonight, because I can see a lot of nodding was going on, but I could also feel a slight squirm, because as you said, Karen, you were telling us how to do our job. Some of you were telling us how to do our job. And, I've been around a few years and got a bit of experience, and so I don't know whether that was how you were feeling, Marnie, Mark, and Elaine, but it was very, very useful, and I really am grateful for the comments that you've made. I liked Beeling's metaphor of learning as leaning forward and leaning back, and I'm going to take that metaphor and just interpret it slightly differently, because for our centenary, I see this year as a moment in history where we take an opportunity to look backward, to pause and reflect on where we've got to, and then to look forward and imagine and dream and hope about the future. So tonight's session has given us some insights into what we might be looking forward to in the future. But I do want to comment on a few of the things that you've said, and just give you some of my own views. Of course, the future is unknown and unpredictable. But as educators, there are things that we can choices about the way we do what we do. And I'm a great fan of Bloom's taxonomy, and let me tell you, I will not tolerate transmission modes of teaching. I will not tolerate only stopping at understanding what we teach. I want in every lesson to see our teaching raise the levels up through applying, analysing, synthesising, and most importantly, getting up to the top two levels, critiquing and then creating. Because I don't think that we have a hope in the future if we cannot get up to that high level of creating new knowledge, creating solutions to problems, but developing the capacity, the skill, the motivation to be creative. I liked your feeling, I think I'm a fan of yours. I liked your story about your P5 student. I think that typifies the very worst of one type of teaching where the students are charged with the task of guessing what's in the teacher's head. A lot of the time, the sort of questions that we ask are intended to elicit that one thing that's at the front of your head. And we don't often reward those wonderfully broad and deviant ideas that are in every child. So I actually prepared some notes here, and I want to tell you this. Gone are the days of teaching as transmission of a fixed body of knowledge. Gone are the days of jugs and mugs and the sage on the stage. You know, those metaphors. They're gone. We will not tolerate those. So teaching's focusing less on what the teacher does and more on what the students are doing in every lesson. And we're hoping that a lot of the time that includes their learning. We have a lot of information now that even in STEM subjects, when students are actively engaged in their learning, they have much greater chance of scoring significantly higher and correspondingly less chance of failure. So active learning means, as I've said before, applying information, analysing, critiquing it, and most of all, being creative about it. I think as teachers we are endlessly astounded by the creativity of the students in the classroom. Endlessly astounded, if only we would let them show us that. So I think that we do have control over some of the things of the future and some of the things now, and that is how we do our teaching. Because we want to develop in them the capacity to not only manage the complex and changing world, but also to lead the way in that world. Now, I shouldn't be saying that here in HCI because I believe we've been leading the way in Singapore, particularly in the research orientation that you've had. And I do want you to know, Dr. Hong, that we are very proud of our partnership with you. But let me just tell you something about our centenary year, because I did say I'm looking back. It was in 1916 that education was first taught at UWA. That was 3 years after the university was founded. So we were very early on. Back then, 2/3 of all schools in Australia were one-teacher schools, and they catered for fewer than 15% of the population. I enjoyed one of those schools in my primary school days. It was in a rural school. There were 35 students in the school, They were aged from 5 to 15 in the one classroom with the one teacher, was the headmaster, every day for 7 years. So with so many schools like that across the country, it's no surprise that education was a highly centralised operation with absolute control from the centre over policy, curriculum, staff and resources. And that's how it stayed for about half a century. But by the 50s, we started to see some change. It was the post-war baby boom that really drove much of the change for education. And I mentioned two aspects. One is that there was a pressure for more schools and for larger schools. So first of all, the primary schools expanded and grew larger, and then started the secondary schools, because it wasn't until about the 60s that we had more than a handful of secondary government schools in the state. And then by the 70s, the universities were starting to expand and multiply, and we were facing for the first time in our history competition. UWA was no longer the only university. And our faculty of education was no longer the only source of secondary teachers in the state. Now, since the 80s, the school system's been changing very steadily, in fits and starts though, and it's become increasingly devolved, so that more than 2/3 of the government schools today are what's called independent public schools. They have their own boards, their own business plan, their one-line budgets, but of course they are still paid centrally. But it's still seen to be a far cry from that highly centralised structure of the early part of the century. But apart from having more flexibility, autonomy and accountability, the schools in WA are also different from how they were 30 years ago on two other scores. One is there have been pressures for more schooling and better schooling across the state and across the country. When I talk about more schooling, I mean schooling is starting at a younger age, and the compulsory schooling goes to an older age. So we're seeing that for example, in our early childhood programs, teachers are being prepared for the education and care of children from birth to year 8, and the secondary schools go up to age 18 now. But I also mean another factor, and that is better schooling. So we're increasingly regulated by a whole lot of national requirements. So we face a national curriculum, national assessments, national standards for teachers, national standards for school principals, and importantly from our point of view, national standards for the accreditation of the teacher preparation programs. So we're mightily constrained in the work we do, ironically, in its effort to improve it. So along the way, we have in our faculty played a part in this changing shape of education provision in the state. Firstly, we started with our secondary teachers, then we've added primary teacher preparation to our program, and in the most recent past, early childhood education and care is part of our suite of offerings. We also prepare school principals. We provide professional support for school-based personnel through the Masters and Doctoral program, and we conduct research that influences both practice and policy. And as I've said, our graduates have been leading the way for 100 years. Now, even though we're a very small faculty, we have a very wide identify, Dr. Hong, the number of cohorts, and I believe I'm going to tell you that we've had 154 master's graduates, and we've had 30 doctoral graduates from our program. And I'm very proud that you're one of them, supervised by Keith Punch, and graduating in 2008. And Joseph Tam, congratulations to you, Dr. Tam, on completing your doctorate, supervised by Anne Chapman, and graduating in 2014. So these are certainly leading the way in Singapore and showing for many people to see what a very fine program that we've had. I'm very proud of our staff. I cannot tell you the work that goes into coming up here and delivering a whole program over all of those years. And it's a great honour for me to see that Marnie is here today, and Elaine, who's been a stalwart throughout all of the program, and Mark, who's been the edgy innovator in all of the things that we do here. And I'm sorry that some of the other staff aren't here today, but I know that they would join with me in thanking you, Dr. Wong, for the opportunity to work with you and the joy of meeting many of the graduates here tonight who've been through our program. So I want to thank you, Dr. Hong, for hosting this event, and I know that waiting outside is a sumptuous feast, as there always is when you come here, and I don't want to be the impediment between you and your summer. But I'd like to thank you, thank the panel for their wonderful contribution to stimulating our thinking, making this work meaningful, and that's how you learn. So thank you so much.
Sorry, please do go have dinner. Thank you all so much for being here.